Is Breath of the Wild becoming the new Resident Evil 4? With the new Legend of Zelda title coming out, Tears of the Kingdom, there's been a whole lot of anticipation for it, and rightly so. What's not to be excited about? Breath of the Wild completely stunned millions of gamers with its massive, beautiful, and deep open world, with seemingly endless amounts of secrets, new areas, monsters, shrines, challenges, wide variety of weapons and accessories, and gave birth to a physics engine that has managed to keep many players hooked and experimenting for hundreds if not thousands of hours ever since it came out back in March of 2017. Although it's certainly not the loudest and most popular opinion around, there are actually a fair amount of Legend of Zelda fans that didn't necessarily dig all of these changes. And this feeling of mostly hype anticipation with only a glimmer of concern based on where the series is headed is what truly reminds me of what Resident Evil 4 was for the Resident Evil series. On at least a surface level, there are some really interesting similarities between these two games. Despite both of them being completely different from their previous well-respected entries, Resident Evil 4 and The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild changed up their respective formulas in a massive way, and subsequently won prestigious awards, including Game of the Year. Both of these games are known for busting open their series in terms of freedom, completely leaving behind what sometimes felt like an abundance of constraints. For Resident Evil, classic staples in the series were the fixed camera angles, mostly puzzle-based gameplay with slower, more horrific, dramatic encounters, plenty of backtracking in order to open up new areas, and some stiff, stubborn features like its tank controls and severely limited inventory. Resident Evil 4 did away with the constraints. The camera shifted to an over-the-shoulder view. The overall movement, direction, and action were made so much more fluid. Fighting was much more common, and you were no longer constrained by a stubborn inventory. There wasn't nearly the same emphasis on puzzles, and none of it came with any tedium, such as walking around various rooms pressing A on everything, hoping to find items to move forward. But rather, new areas to explore kept connecting, and the encounters with enemies became much more dynamic and common. While highly critically praised, Resident Evil 4 took the Resident Evil series a completely different direction, and ultimately to the disdain of many of the critics and fans that missed the structure and formula of classic Resident Evil. Resident Evil 4 remains a stellar, highly praised, and pretty much universally recognized and accepted as a masterpiece, even if you don't like what it did to the series. Now, the question is that I've been thinking about, how similar is that to what is happening with The Legend of Zelda right now with Breath of the Wild? Classic traditional Zelda, in its various forms, have an incredible emphasis on puzzles, strategic navigation, and key items. In Zelda, broadly speaking, there was always a pretty strict order of sequences. You would have to go one place for a certain item, use that item to access a new area to get another item, and so on and so forth. It ultimately comes down to knowing where to go, and can also become notoriously confusing on where to go or what to do next. And just like Resident Evil has had players looking up guides and walkthroughs to avoid getting stuck for a very long time. But in Breath of the Wild, there is no longer the restriction to a certain order of events. There's no longer any arbitrary reason on why you can't go a certain way. The Zelda adventure went from something that you could tell is supposed to follow a pretty straightforward path of progress into the complete opposite. You're not going to get held back for, say, having the wrong wallet or whatever totally silly reason is going to stop Link from saving the world. The element of puzzles and strategic navigation is greatly alive and well, specifically in all of the shrines that you try to find and complete in order to increase your heart pieces and stamina. But at the end of the day, these are all optional. This is no longer the type of game that would hold you back with some unsatisfactory text box just for you to backtrack and try to speak to every single NPC to make sure you didn't miss something. It's more like once you finish the tutorial on the small bit of land, whatever you decide to do from there, wherever you decide to go, is 100% your choice. This is a far cry from having to visit 6 to 8 dungeons in a specific order, and doing your best to ensure that you didn't miss any key item or events along the way. While the word limitations has a pretty negative connotation to it, it's still incredibly important to point out that there are plenty of valid reasons for players to enjoy these types of gaming formulas. When done right, limitations can be a functional and very cool thing in their own way, and as we've mentioned, creates more emphasis on navigating an area just the right way and solving a variety of puzzles. When Zelda in particular keeps the direction of the adventure pretty tight, this ends up making the game significantly more story-driven as a result, and there was a lot of classic Zelda fans starving for more of that in Breath of the Wild. For a series like Legend of Zelda, story and its familiar direction matters a lot to its fans. While Tears of the Kingdom is continuing on in Breath of the Wild's footsteps, I don't think there's any reason to believe it's going to downward spiral the series like Resident Evil 5 and 6 did, but there's absolutely bound to be a lot of Zelda fans that are starting to wonder, perhaps even worry a little bit, about the next time they'll see an entry that'll bear resemblance to the classic formula that their love for the series is based on. My personal opinion is that, of course, while all gaming companies are capable of mistakes, I do not think Nintendo is going to make the mistake of completely abandoning the classic feel and writing of your typical Legend of Zelda. Nintendo is capable of providing more support and development for a key IP like Legend of Zelda than Capcom was able to do for Resident Evil. I believe we're still going to receive a Zelda that walks much tighter of a journey and gets pushed along with cutscenes and narration like the fans have come accustomed to, but of course it's impossible to be sure when that's going to happen. What do you guys think? When is Nintendo going to put out a 3D game that is more akin to the likes of Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess? Will it be on the Switch or the next Nintendo console? Ultimately, it just got me thinking about how much will Breath of the Wild's success change the direction of the Legend of Zelda formula. We already have a direct sequel with Tears of the Kingdom. Will it end up being as massively influential as Resident Evil 4? Will we ever see some Zelda remakes that use this new style, just as Resident Evil did with 2 and 3? Would that even work? Let me know what you guys think, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episodes of It's Expensive But Is It Good?, Beating and Reviewing, Top 10s, and much, much more. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.